So welcome, everybody. Thank you for showing up here at our first new regime SMPTE chapter. Cindy Zilsdorf is my second in command, secretary treasurer. Ian is here from the board. That's about it, I guess, for our new board members and things. So Ian's been here for a little while. But I'm very happy to present a guy I'll call a friend now, too, tonight, Elias Puurunen. You can see him there on camera. He's coming from the East Coast, just south of Toronto, so a little late for him. But thank you so much for doing that. Couple of things of business before we get started, some of the usual stuff. Thank you to Ramona, who's not here, but thank you for Nevada County Media for showing us, for using their facility this evening. There is the list of your SMPTE Sacramento chapter people, if you don't know us. That's who we are. I know Jeb is going to join remotely, I believe, and Victor's often here, but we're missing some of those guys. And I think we still have an open spot, if I'm not mistaken. So if anybody wants to get more involved, then let us know. It's not a big ask. It's just some work every now and then trying to find a presentation. In fact, we need to talk about that for next month and a few things like that. So if you want to get involved, it's a great way to get involved and do something good for the community, for sure. In fact, we have a couple of students here tonight, which is awesome. Thank you. First, or maybe one student, I guess. First time here, but not a student anymore. Sorry. But happy to have you here. It's great. We need to do a little bit more marketing on our own Sacramento side and update the website, but the YouTube channel, we do have a YouTube channel where all these talks are archived, and that's it. And I think I made that big enough you could actually take a screenshot if you want that now or shoot that. But it's because the URL is difficult, so I did make a little smaller URL there if you want. Tiny URL, SMPTE-SAC, or take the QR code there, and we can do that afterwards if you want to. But we will archive this talk along with all the other ones. So you have them there. And some of these, I was looking before the show, got some pretty good views. So getting some good plays on here. We'll keep that up. And then also there is a website for this chapter, which we'll update with some more information in the coming months. I'll give us some time there. So there's that. Summer hiatus, I'm riffing off of what Bob's slides were back in May. So we did take a summer off, as you all know. That's typical for this chapter. And we were going to have a social meeting we typically do in September. That didn't happen, too busy, and there's IBC, and a lot of people were off on IBC as well. So maybe we can look at November, October. We're already in October. So we'll send an email out, I think, and ask if people still want to do a social this gather. But look for that coming up could be late October or early November. And then we'll have another presentation like this, live or virtual, in November for sure. So a little bit about Elias. You can read, I'm not going to read this word for word, but you can breeze along with it. An early innovator in doing live trade shows and event experiences. His company called Tractus Events. And he's one of the guys that I know Ian Foster was talking earlier that will, if he can't find something to do what he wants, he'll just program it. So he's a developer and an awesome gentleman in general to make sure that you get the right experience that you need from business conferences, trade shows, workshops, whatever. He will figure out the best way to get that done for you. He's a fan of mine, of Netgear's, our company. That's how I got to know him, because he uses Netgear switches. This is not a Netgear sponsored event, of course, but Elias is a great resource for us because he's out there in the wild doing this stuff. Like I said, he's in Canada, south of Toronto, so there are some of his credits from there, University of Waterloo's Watt Speed case, the Circle of Excellence Award, and the book I haven't looked at yet, but he's got a great sounding book that, of course, parallels some of this, The Memorable, Profitable Virtual, How to Run a Virtual Conference, Conventions, and Trade Shows That Create Meaning, Value, and Lasting Connections. And all of us here have been to a bunch of shows. Some of us have worked them for a number of years, and that's not easy. And I'm really curious about how this is all changing, and that's kind of why we're here tonight. And Elias is going to show us all that. I think that's it from my slideshows. And we'll elegantly switch this back over. There's Elias.
Hi.
So coming to us live is Elias. And throughout the presentation, if you guys have any questions, of course, feel free to speak up and ask them along the way. But I will move this guy over here. So locally we can see you, Elias. And
awesome.
Take it away.
Awesome. You all look so comfy tonight. I'm actually a little bit jealous. I've just spent time building this studio out, and now I got to stand for the next hour, and everybody gets to sit back, relax, have snacks. I love it. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. Uh, Thank you for having me. Like John said, I'm Elias Puurunen. If you've seen any of my work, you'll know that I'm deep into the AV over IP world these days, specifically on NDI. Um, I'll start with a quick disclaimer. I'm going to mention a lot of different AV over IP protocols. I personally like NDI a lot. I do a lot of work with it. Uh, I'm not looking to endorse or anything like that, any particular uh, AV over IP protocol. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about may be NDI specific, but there's lessons that we can learn and apply to all of these other protocols. And the reason I say that is because what's really cool about AV over IP is that think back to like 20 years ago when we were first, let me think here. Let me make sure the year math makes sense because it's 2025, and to me 10 years ago was 2005. Does anybody else feel that in their soul?
Yes.
Yeah. So think back to like, maybe let's go back to 1995, okay? 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, we're starting to make the switch over to digital video, right? Like we've been dealing with analog for a long time. We've been dealing with, interlaced video, the fun of interlaced video, and now we're starting to move into the world of digital video. We've got DVD is on the horizon. We've got progressive scan on the horizon. Computers are starting to get fast enough that they can actually do real-time character generation. You get the early stuff like the Inscriber, Inca series. You get the original video toaster, right? So we're getting to a point where digital video is just on the frontier, right? And then we accelerate a few years and we get into the realm of DVI. We get the early rumblings of HDMI. We're dealing with SDI. But what's cool is we've actually done a lot of the hard work already when it comes to AV over IP, audiovisual over IP, whether that's NDI, IPMX, Dante, SDVOE, OMT is the latest one to hit the scene. There's also it's not DMX, and I don't think it's DXM because I think that's the stuff in cough syrup. But
DMF.
DMF, thank you. Yes, DMF is one of the latest ones on the scene. So we have all these different protocols. But the cool part is the hard work of getting video data into digital form, that's already been done. We're just changing the transport mechanisms, right? And just to make sure that my nerd creds are in order here, I thought I'd just show a little bit. This is me circa 2011. The grand total gear that I had back then, I was in university, so I was totally broke. I spent my student loans buying stuff like video mixers and Amiga video toasters. To the point where I had to take a credit card out to make rent, and my parents weren't impressed by that. So the first lesson in first year was priorities. But we were doing, even back then, I was doing, live events. I was really fortunate in high school to be mentored by an incredible audiovisual technician. He let us run the gamut. I mean, we're talking like 2003. We're doing dual IMAG, multiple camera mixing, bringing in a PC source, bringing in, I think 2005 we brought in a DVD player. Like we were doing some pretty cool stuff. We were using a real-time nonlinear editor. Anybody remember the DPS Perception RT, also known as the Leach or Harris velocity? Anybody remember that NLE?
Yeah, I remember the name at least. I never used one, but yeah.
So it was one of the coolest NLEs because it was real-time nonlinear editing in like circa 94, right? And that had SDI in, now that I think about it. But because we were poor high school students, we had to use BNC to RCA connectors, and it was awful, but it was awesome. This thing had 3 cards in it, and 2 of the cards were for doing real-time 3D effects. And by that I mean text, basically, without having to wait for the stupid thing to render. And that was cutting edge back then. We were using that to do digital signage. So I remember the days of trying to get multiple sources that were not time-based corrected and not gen-lockable, trying to get that into a video toaster and buying TBC cards and learning what the heck gen-lock was. But the hard work of all that has now been done for us. We now have digital video. It's just a matter of how do we get this data from point A to point B. And since 2021, really, I've been pulled heavily back into the live events world to the point where we're producing conferences, corporate town halls, and webinars with our setup. This setup has been shipped across Canada and back, and it's all audiovisual over IP. In fact, what you're seeing right now from this view is all AV over IP. Let me switch over to another camera here. So just to walk you through the setup, what I've got going on is I've got 2 NDI cameras going into my vMix laptop. I've got an enclosure that's got a dedicated network card in it. I'll talk more about that later. We're just mixing everything together. And then the NDI output is going over to my main computer into NDI webcam, which is going into Zoom. Now let's talk about the microphone for a second, because I've got this microphone clipped on here. This is a Hollyland M2S clip-on microphone. I love it. It's super easy to use, but it's NDI too. So I took a little mini PC, a little Raspberry Pi equivalent, and turned and set up NDI free audio, and this microphone now just sits on my network. It's a USB microphone, USB class compliant microphone, just sits on my network. Anytime I need to do a stream, I pop it on, tune into that NDI source, and away we go. This is one of the really cool parts of AV over IP is just the flexibility. I just want to see too, by a show of hands, who here has been uses NDI on a regular basis or plans to use it in their setups? Who here's been using it on a regular basis?
Ian, boy.
Ian. Yes, of course you are.
Technically, yes. Okay. 1.5.
Kind of. 1.5. There we go.
Yes.
Out of curiosity, who's using SMPTE 2110, doing 2110 build outs? Ooh, fancy! I love that. So, and is everybody else here just kind of staying on baseband? We're still doing SDI, cable runs everywhere. Like, what else are we using? Yeah, pretty much just SDI baseband.
Chris tried NVX for an AV system, but that's kind of a different world.
Oh, interesting. And are you just doing control with that, or are you also doing sending signals around?
It's for a presentation system in a boardroom, sending audio and video to screens and touch screens and computer and stuff.
Okay, cool. That's similar to what QSys does, right?
Probably similar, yeah. It's kind of Crestron's proprietary AV over IP solution.
Oh, right, because they have their own.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we have to have a million standards.
Yeah. No, theirs is
Yes.
better.
Nothing like a million standards. It means that I will always have a job building weird adapters that will take NDI and turn it into some weird thing over there. Actually, there's an awesome company called Salray Works. They make an NDI to DMX converter, like the light fixture control standard.
Huh? Wow.
Yeah. Let that just simmer for a second. Right? This is a protocol that's built for digital audio and video, but they're doing lighting control over it.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. And like if you've worked with lighting and you haven't been working with anything like what are the two standards? There's ArtNet and then there's the other one. Shoot, I can't remember it because it's late and I don't have enough coffee. Anyway, isn't it like Open Stage Control? Not OSC.
Anyway, it's late. Don't worry.
It's an open standard anyway, but basically it allows you to carry multiple DMX universes over an Ethernet cable, which is freaking awesome because I don't have to run a DMX cable 300 feet anymore. I love it. This is one of the reasons that we went really hard into AV over IP setups was just the sheer flexibility and convenience. One cable. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, that means that there's one point of failure. You're not wrong, and there's ways around that, but it definitely it can be an issue, right? So every signal is digital now. Like SDI, what is that short for? Serial Digital Interface. So what are we really doing when we're transmitting a signal to and fro? All we're doing is taking a signal, digitizing it somehow, firing it over some sort of transport, decoding that signal, and then outputting it through a series of electronics and chips and whatnot that command whatever it is, monitor, screen, projector, to light up pixels at certain intervals, at certain times with a certain intensity. That's all we're doing. In the olden days, right, we would drive a physical beam in the TV. We'd actually, our signals had to be so tightly calibrated because we're actually controlling an electron beam that's going yit, and then over, and then yit, and then we've got H blank and over again, and we draw that line and H blank, and we're relying on the fact that our vision sucks, right? Persistence of vision makes the whole thing work. So the digital video part is actually a little bit easier now too, because think about it this way. Analog video has got like a million shades of broken, about 10 shades of good enough, and about 3 shades of it's perfect, don't touch it. It would give you real-time feedback about how bad your signal sucked. Digital video, on the other hand, AV over IP, you get 3 shades: broken, jank, and perfect. And it can be kind of difficult to troubleshoot that in this world, especially in the AV over IP world, because there's a lot of different things that you could possibly troubleshoot. So we've moved away from analog video. We're now in the digital video world. To this point with SDI, we've been carrying 1, 2, maybe 3 types of signals down the same wire, right? We're carrying audio, we're carrying video, maybe we're carrying a little bit of metadata. And we're pretty fixed, unless we've got expensive routers, we're pretty fixed on how that signal's going to get around. We haven't even talked about Genlock, haven't even talked about sync, haven't even talked about frame rates. We're going to leave all that aside for a second, because in the world of software where I live, that all gets kind of fuzzy. And we'll talk about NDI and the fuzziness that we discovered there. So like I mentioned, our entire infrastructure is all based around networking and AV over IP now. One of the reasons that we use, and like, this is not sponsored, by the way. I'm going to mention Netgear. This is not sponsored, but I love them. The reason I ended up going with Netgear specialized switches, like they're one of the manufacturers of the AV line of switches. There's a couple other manufacturers out there. Yamaha's getting into the game. Who else is in the game right now as well? Ubiquiti, they've also got some AV profiles for some of their switches. But Netgear was kind of the first to the party to really get it right and dial in a known working configuration that will work for 90% of people. In fact, probably more like 95. And after having spent a lot of time on tech support with them, I can come to the conclusion that with these pro switches, if you have proper AV switches, if you're experiencing broken signals or jank signals, it is probably not the network hardware, or at least the switch. There's a lot more that goes into networked AV. For us, we're basing our AV structure all around AV over IP. We're carrying video, audio, metadata, and power across Ethernet cables. We're running one cable to all of our sources. And we're also generally running what I would call commodity hardware instead of specialized hardware. So in the photos here, I've got a photo of one of our portable rigs. We put a Netgear switch with a UPS and a permanently mounted router into a flight case, and we can fly that wherever we want. Plop a laptop in front of that. In fact, the laptop that I'm streaming from right now, plop that on top, and boom, we're off and running. Plug in our 3 cameras, and we're good to go. In fact, I did a test. The last time we were on the show floor, we were doing a town hall for a company. We were out, it was a 3-camera shoot with iMag and audience microphones. We had 3 cameras at the back, 1 at the front. The one at the front was to capture attendees, and we also had 2 confidence monitors down by the stage. We were out of the venue, packed and everything on the truck within 90 minutes of the show wrapping. And we've gotten faster since, and that is simply down to the fact that AV over IP again, you've just got that one cable. You're not winding up, tons and tons of cable. And in fact, with our new setup, we actually got a couple more switches. So that way we can put them in strategic locations. They're like your typical throwdown boxes, right? And so we can run really short cables between the switch and our cameras, and then our long lines is just a single trunk line between our switches. And again, with switches like the Netgear, you get that you get auto trunking, auto lag, so that you can expand the switch, and it will just kind of do everything for you. And the reason I'm talking about Netgear a fair amount is what they've done is what needs to happen in AV over IP, which is what happened with SDI, and one of the reasons why SDI kind of just works. And that's simply because a lot of really smart people spent a lot of time with terrible hardware trying to figure out how to make all this stuff work properly. And we're going through those same growing pains with AV over IP right now. We use a lot of off-the-shelf stuff. We use a lot of off-the-shelf computers. We had specific NDI hardware converters in the past. In fact, I'm going to grab one. I'm using it to power my TV right now, but I will show you one of these NDI converters. There it is. Some delicious SDI. Love it. So got an NDI converter here. So this is one of the Bird Dog quads, not sponsored. I like Bird Dog. They're cool people. So we've got 4 SDI inputs. We also have, we have 4 SDI inputs. We have an HDMI output, and we have an Ethernet jack. There's a little hardware box. Now, if you've been around the industry for a long time, you probably are thinking hardware means some really custom ASIC, or maybe FPGA, or maybe you're just going like, way back when we're talking about like actual, breadboards, and, you're doing custom solder jobs, and, you're taking all sorts of electronic components and putting it together, right? So inside this guy, this runs Linux. This runs Linux. It's a little computer. In fact, I've got one of these rooted right now. I've loaded my own software on it just for funsies, because it's a computer. The reason why this works at all is this guy's equipped with an FPGA. And the FPGA, what that does, specialized piece of hardware, takes the signals in, converts them to NDI or the other direction, and fires out either NDI outputs or NDI inputs. It's kind of neat, accelerates everything. But these days, we can go way faster than, our computers can go way faster than they did even 10 years ago. We can encode like H.264 and H.265 video faster than real time now. Same with NDI's codec, the Speed HQ codec. It can encode and decode way faster than real time. And we'll talk numbers in a little bit. Numbers from actual experimentation. And so because computers have gotten faster, I mean, think about what I'm doing here. I'm using a mid-range gaming laptop. It's nothing special. 16 gigs of RAM, i7 13600, whatever, 12 cores. I'm using that to mix video and audio together in real time from the network. And I'm looking at the CPU graph. There are 4 cores doing nothing right now. Like, they are just sitting there. I'd like to imagine that they are sitting around the poker table in the CPU. And they're just like, Core 12 just got a full house. That's what I like to think it's doing. But it's not even under any stress. Like, we've got room to go. And so in our setup, we're moving away from more specialized pieces of hardware that have FPGAs and moving to, more off-the-shelf technology, because I can go down to Best Buy and get a mini PC for a couple $100 if one of them dies on show site, and I can turn that into a presentation, PowerPoint machine for graphics. I can turn that into a titler, shout out New Blue. I can turn that into an NDI decoder, so I can actually send sources to it. And I can hook it up to a TV, and I can decode an NDI source. I can use it as an NDI converter. It only costs a couple $100. Problem with FPGA-based designs is the unit price for an FPGA, I mean, in Canadian dollars, I think it's about $500 or $600. So that's, I know it's only about 7 or 8 American, but I'll let you do your own conversion. Point is, one of these and this converter's got a lead time, right? So we're starting to see commodity computers get powerful enough that they can just do real-time audio and video and still have room to do other things. It's kind of cool. I got a question for everybody. Who wants to know the truth about why I got into NDI in the first place? Why I really started to go down the rabbit hole? Who wants to know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
All right. So the PR answer as to why I went into NDI, and this is going on the public record, so there's no pressure whatsoever. The PR reason why I went into NDI, and this is still true, is because it saved us. We had to put on it at the very end of the pandemic, COVID-19, we had to put on a 3-4 day hybrid conference with about 200 delegates, fairly small show, but here was the trick. The main plenary room during the breakout sessions became the breakout rooms. We put up the air walls. And so I went, uh-oh, baseband's not really going to work here because we're going to need to reroute these cameras. And then I remember that there was this thing called NDI because I had been using it a whole bunch in the pandemic to get signals around. We were doing plenty of jank stuff. And I grabbed a couple of Logitech Mevos and another NDI camera and some, PCs that we had in storage, like literally scrounging everything, every little bit of gear that I could, right? Like I'm self-financing this. We've got a small team. And what we did was we realized, hey, wait a second. If all of the webcams, if all the cameras are NDI, and these signals can just be routed to wherever we need to go, all we need to do is make sure that all of these computers and all of these cameras are on the same network, and we'll be okay for when the air walls go up because we've only got 5 minutes between sessions to raise the air walls and set up the presenters, right? We were supposed to have a crew of 5. 3 people got sick right before the conference, so it was Mike and I. Shout out to my main man, Mike. He remembers that experience very well. In fact, it was so, the whole thing was so short on staff, the venue was so short on staff on that one, that the manager who checked us in at the front desk was also our waiter at dinner that night. And he was serving us breakfast the next morning.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He got so tired of me that he eventually said on Sunday, we were doing the setup on Saturday and Sunday, he eventually came to me and said, here's the key to the hotel. Just whatever you need, just go get it, right? Like gave me a key to the hotel. And I went, ooh, this is cool. You probably shouldn't give me this. But it helped. By the way, if you're working in a venue, that's an underrated hack. If you can get them to give you a key to let you into places that you might be marginally allowed to be in, awesome. It'll save some time. I got other stories about manipulating venues. We'll save those for later if we have time. So that was the PR reason. And it's true. The flexibility allowed us to run a conference and punch well above our weight as a company. Like 2 people had no right putting on a 4-room, multi-day, multi-parallel breakout session conference. But we did, and part of that was down to the flexibility of NDI and AV-over-IP. Here's the real reason that I got really deep into NDI. I had a couple of NDI cameras that I could never quite get working right. And I have a tendency when I can't get something to work right to just throw my brain at it until it either gives up or I've exhausted every reasonable possibility short of a solar flare fixing this. So I went to the NDI website and saw that it had a software development kit. Haha, cool. I can work with a software development kit. So I downloaded that and started to sniff around and and this was around 23 that I really started to get into this. And I went deep down the rabbit hole looking for the magical go fast settings that I was missing, right? I was convinced that there was some setting that would make all of these setups go faster and get rid of the jank. By the way, is everybody familiar with the term jank? If you're not, it's going to be your new favorite term. Jank, or something that is janky, is something that just works right some of the time, maybe even most of the time, but it just goes wrong sometimes. It's like when your car is making that noise, but then you go over a speed bump and it goes away for a little while. But then you go over another speed bump and it comes back. That's janky, okay? That's jank. So I was searching, because I had these cameras that were acting kind of jank, I was looking for the magical go fast settings, and as I dived deeper and deeper, I realized there is no magical go fast setting that just makes NDI just work. And the same is true with every single AV over IP protocol out there. The way to make an AV over IP system work right is the same principles it takes to make a baseband system work right. The system is only ever going to be as good as the sum of its parts. Everybody here has used a decimator at some point. You know what I'm talking about when I talk about the decimator, little red boxes? It's a little red box. You can throw an SDI or an HDMI signal into it. It can be the crankiest signal on the planet, and it will give you on the other end the cleanest, most beautiful signal ever. They're awesome. And they're like virtually unobtainable, and we somehow got like one or two of them. Thank you. Shout out to my friend Mark at Horizon Solutions in Canada for hooking me up with a couple. We really needed those. To make a baseband system work, you need to have good components, right? Like if you just take a random laptop and throw it into your signal chain with nothing in front of it, you're going to have problems, right? And it's the same thing in the NDI and AV over IP world. If you just throw a system onto your network or throw your AV over IP onto an existing network, you're probably going to have a bad time. And the problem right now is because we're in that early days of the transition to AV over IP, building, maintaining, and troubleshooting these setups is still a bit of an art rather than science. There is still some science to it, but the science is still in that nebulous, hazy, we're kind of plucking it out piece by piece. There's lots of smart people that are working on this. I'd like to think that I'm helping contribute to that in some ways. And like I said, analog had many degrees of broken, 10 degrees of good enough, and 3 degrees of perfect, don't touch it. Oh, the days of vertical and horizontal hold. How I miss thee. It was really fun as a kid to just mess with a V hold and watch the screen go crazy. Oh, hey, fun fact. Speaking of vertical hold, everybody here's played the original Atari 2600, Pong, that sort of stuff? I see some smiles. Okay, cool. So I actually wrote, when I was in university, I actually wrote a game for the Atari 2600 in 24 hours, which was one of the hardest and coolest things I've ever done. The 2600 came out in 1977, and it has a grand total of 128 bytes of RAM. I'll let that sink in just for a second. 128 bytes of RAM. And you might be thinking like, okay, well, how do you get graphics to the screen? You're literally writing graphics to the screen line by line, and you are preparing the next line to be drawn while the current scan line is being drawn. And you have to get your calls absolutely right, because if you update the registers too early to the video processing unit, you'll actually screw up the current line. And then if you do it too late, you'll actually get remnants from the previous line. What's really cool about the Atari is you have full control over vertical sync, which is why getting Atari 2600 games to work on a modern TV is a freaking nightmare, because the developer of the game is not compelled to wait for vertical sync. They can just do whatever they want. I don't miss those days. But the thing is that these same first principles still apply to AV over IP. The system is only going to be as good as the sum of its parts. If you've got untuned hardware, if you've got, if you're trying to switch things over a $20 switch that we got at Best Buy, yeah, you're probably going to have problems. If you take a couple of NDI cameras and throw them onto an existing corporate network that's full of all existing traffic and cross your fingers that that'll work, yeah, it probably won't, right? I'm trying to help make this less art and more science. I don't have all the answers, and there's still lots of stuff that makes me go, WTF is going on here? But what I am noticing is this. The skills that are needed for what's coming down the pipe for AV over IP, regardless of the protocol, regardless of the format, your skills are going to need to be cross-discipline. We need people that have IT skills in addition to their existing audio skill set and video skill set. Like, both are going to be important. Will you need to be a programmer level to be able to use this stuff properly? No. It helps, and AI is helping bridge that gap. I mean, you can just about vibe code an NDI screen capture utility at this point. It's getting frighteningly good. So that's pretty cool. One of the ways I've noticed that companies are kind of trying to solve the jank problem is by throwing way overbuilt systems with really high-end graphics cards and gigantic power-consuming CPUs at the problem. And you'd be surprised at some of the corporations, some of the broadcasters, some of the media companies, some of the hardware people that have called me in and said, hey, we've got this machine that's dropping frames. And they're on like a 32 core, like 32 physical cores, not hyperthread, physical cores. 128 gigs of RAM, graphics cards that like I didn't even think civilians could buy. And they have stuff that's acting weird. They have systems that are untweaked and untuned. We're just starting to scratch the surface as to what does it take to make a reliable system. Let me just give you an example of all the different ways that you can get a frame drop. So, different ways that frames can be dropped in NDI. You can have a bad cable that just doesn't let the signal through or only lets it through intermittently. Your sender could have a full send buffer on the network card. When I talk about network card, it could be the physical network card like this guy, or it could be a little chipset that's built into your laptop. When you send the pack, maybe it makes it out of that laptop and gets over to the switch. Well, what's called the egress buffer, or the little buffer that's in front of what's going outbound to a further sender, that might be full. And so, hey, we can't actually send the frame to that sender because it's underwater and its buffer is full, so we're just going to drop the packet. You could have a full receive buffer on the downstream computer that's going to be taking the packet in, i.e., hey, I can't take any more packets. Drop. You might have a badly configured firewall rule. You might have something called a deferred procedure call or a driver, like the network card handler, that doesn't run in time. You might have, if you're using vMix or TriCaster Mini S or Wirecast or OBS, that the socket that opens, essentially the bucket to hold the packets that it's asking for, that might be full. And then you might get that far, but then while the frame is being decoded, the thread, the unit of execution that's running that, might stall. Windows or Linux might say to it, hey, stop what you're doing. I need something else to run for a little while. Okay, you do your little thing, Windows search, Windows indexing service. Okay, cool, you're done. All right, I'm going to put you on pause. All right, we're going to go back to the decode, and it's too late. You might have the render thread experience the same thing. You could have interrupt contention, like if you've got the graphics card needs attention, and the network card needs attention, and you're saving stuff to the disk, and it's all coalescing on one CPU core, again, you're going to have a bad time. How do you even test each of these items to see what's going on? The problem is that the protocol gets blamed. Oh, we don't use NDI because it's janky. Oh, we don't use SDVOE because whatever. We use, SMPTE 2110 because we've got specialized hardware for it, right? And it turns out that the gear matters. And the tools, what is also missing from the industry right now is tools to verify that gear meets standards, right? This is why having companies like Netgear that like have engineers that stay up till like 5 in the morning troubleshooting and tweaking and tuning and testing these profiles is so important. Because you want to be able to rule out different parts of, you want to be able to not have to debug as hard certain classes of problem, right? Like in the baseband world, okay, we've got a signal, the TV does not want to sync to this signal at all. Okay, throw a decimator in front of it. We could try to go and troubleshoot that the signal coming out of whatever device is set to a weird refresh rate, is set, maybe it's got some weird timing. Who cares? Decimator into the TV. We know the decimator works, so if we've got a problem between the decimator and the device, it's either the cable or it's the device. We're ruling out an entire class of problems. And it's the same, and we're going through these same growing pains right now with AV-over-IP, with NDI. We're still building out these tools. And the tricky part sometimes with the tools is sometimes the tools themselves are being affected by things that they can't measure. It's way too easy to just blame AV-over-IP for the problems, the protocol for the problems. Oh, it's NDI. Oh, it's Dante HD. Oh, it's Dante Audio. You get a well-tuned system. I mean, we did a test a couple nights ago and by test I mean accident, where we just flooded a gigabit a second at that laptop and just firing NDI frames at it as fast as we could. It didn't drop a single frame. And then we put more sources into it, and it didn't drop frames either. Like, these systems can handle it. It's just a matter of figuring out how. The network size matters, too, for real-time AV-over-IP, as I've learned. Because you would think, okay, we've got a gigabit worth of, let's say we've got a network, you've got laptops, you've got PCs, and they've got a gigabit network card in it, right? And you think, a gigabit per second, man, we can fit a lot of HD streams into it. Like a typical HD NDI source, I'm talking 1080p 60, you're looking at about 100 to 130, 140 megabits per second worth of data being transmitted. Plus or minus, depends on the sender. If you've got the advanced SDK, you can override that a little bit. You can have some real fun with that, by the way, and break things in a really fantastic way. And you would think, okay, we've got way more than enough bandwidth at 1,000 megabits per second, right? But it turns out that 1 gigabit is not a lot for real-time AV because we can't think in terms of 1,000 megabits per second. We're thinking in terms of what's your refresh rate? 1,000 divided by whatever your refresh rate is, right? 1,000 milliseconds in a second. Divide that by your refresh rate. If we're living in 60 FPS, we've got 16 milliseconds to get stuff done and change, right? So if you do the division, you find real quick that 1,000 megabits per second, that works out to 1 megabit of transfer per millisecond. So that means in a 16 millisecond time slice, if you send more than 16 megabits worth of data to a downstream device, you're going to overload it. So you also have to think not only about how much bandwidth have you got, suddenly clocking matters again. Notice how in this talk I haven't talked about clocks, genlock, sync, anything like that. That stuff matters here too. It might be AV over IP, but if you've got two senders that are not synced up and they've got garbage clocks inside of them, right? And some of these older cameras have got garbage clocks inside of them that send frames whenever they feel like it. Right? It's like getting a tax refund. You'll see it at some point, whatever. And you can get into these situations where these two senders will get either just a little bit desynced or one of them will just act up a little bit, buffer just a few too many packets, and then send them all out all at the same time. AV over IP hates bursty traffic. You want as smooth traffic as possible. Clocking matters. And if you've got ill-behaved devices that are just bursting packets onto the network when another sender is sending, you can easily overload a receiver with a stunningly low amount of data. So this is where you get into stuff like what I call your burst budget, right? So we had a sender that as soon as we would hook this sender up in vMix, we would see all of our NDI sources start dropping frames and start getting really stuttery. But the second that we took this sender off, this source off of our vMix, everything went back to normal. The whole network stabilized. And we were going, well, what the heck is going on? This is a sender that's doing maybe 10 megabits per second. It's doing a compressed NDI HX feed. Anytime you hear NDI HX, just think H.264 or H.265 and is being carried over NDI. That's HX. What was happening with that sender was it was under so much load that the network card driver wasn't getting enough time to run. And so it was actually inside the computer itself. It was buffering a whole bunch of packets to be sent, and then it would fire them all out at the same time. And so all of a sudden, you would see these, I'd be in Wireshark, which is a fantastic tool for analyzing networks. You can get into like packet level stuff and see exactly what's going to a computer. So we were seeing these crazy, like quick spikes and then back to normal, and quick spikes of traffic and back to normal, and quick spikes of traffic and back to normal. And it was this badly behaved sender that was poisoning the entire NDI setup. And just to give you an idea of packets, right? So if you get 13, so when you're dealing with a network, every piece of data is broken into what's called a packet. And you've got a header that basically says, here's where the packet needs to go. And then you've got a data section, and that's the actual data that's going to be sent over. So you've got the header, you've got the data. The data is going to be the important bit that gets passed down to some downstream application, right? Like NDI, for example. So when NDI takes a video frame, it's going to turn it into a whole bunch of packets. Well, actually what it does is it doesn't turn into a whole bunch of packets. NDI will take a frame, compress it down to speed HQ, and then it will send that compressed frame over to the operating system. It'll actually say to Windows or Linux, hey, here's some data. I need you to get it to this IP address. Cool. Now the operating system turns that, uses the network driver, turns that into packets, and sends those over to the network card. And the network card is responsible for picking those packets up and actually firing them out over to the switch. And then it's up to the switch to say, okay, cool, I've got a packet here that's going to port 1, cool. I got a packet going to port 2. Oh, I got a whole bunch of packets here for port 1. Port 1's got a little bit, waiting, so I'm just going to put this in the buffer, in the egress buffer. And then the reverse operation happens. So the packet goes out over the network, packet gets switched over the network, goes down the wire into the receiving computer. The receiving computer reassembles all the packets into something that, into data, and then the downstream application gets, some binary data that it then turns into whatever it needs to turn into. The issue, though, with AV-over-IP, and this is why you get into really big issues with bursty traffic, is you can very easily get into a position, especially depending on the protocol, where if you lose 1 or 2 packets, that entire frame is now dead, right? And so you actually have to be careful and have a good idea of how many packets are actually going out over the network and how many packets is this machine receiving per second. Because it's a mathematical ceiling. As soon as you hit this point, you're going to drop packets, guaranteed. Even if 99% of the time it looks like you've got tons of headroom, you burst out more than 1398 on a gigabit connection, you've maxed it out. That's it. We're done. And the problem is that network traffic on consumer PCs is rarely smooth because Microsoft has spent a lot of time making Windows a very good general purpose operating system. You know what Windows is not good at doing out of the box? Real-time audio video, or really anything real-time. That is a talk for another day, going into the depths of Windows and threading and making Windows machines blue screen in all sorts of cool, fun ways. You want to get a Windows, you want to test the reliability of a modern Windows machine, put vMix or TriCaster on it and have it stream some live video. And you will find out real quick how good the parts are in that system. Bonus points if you can make the room a little hot. So what's the point of all this talking? Is it like, am I saying that AV over IP is an unworkable mess and we should just go back to baseband? No, not at all. What I'm saying here is that this stuff takes time. Just like you wouldn't go jump headfirst into an install at a venue without evaluating, do these products actually meet our needs, and do we have the people and the capability to maintain this system, right? Everybody here has probably been in a boardroom at a company at some point with the derelict install system from 5 years ago that nobody knows how to use, has instructions that were laminated that are long since out of date, and there's 8 remotes and nobody knows what any of them do, right? Building a system is really easy and maintaining it is the hard part. And remember, SDI doesn't just work 100% of the time these days either, right? Like we didn't just get to, the mid-2000s, we get SDI and all of a sudden, the ATEM comes around, like the ATEM Mini, we can fire sources in there and it all just works and everybody's happy, right? It took a lot of really smart people doing a lot of really hard work with a lot of badly behaved devices that didn't follow standards to make a world that's pretty much plug and play. And that's what's happening with AV over IP right now. To wrap up, I'll show you a little bit behind the scenes of the system that I'm running here. So over here, what I've got running, like I mentioned, is I've got my laptop. It's running vMix. Hey, no frame drops. Awesome. I love that. So this session is actually a little bit of an experiment, if I'm honest, because I'm actually using my utility called Relay, Relay for NDI. It's going to be a part of another product that I make. And basically what it does is it's like a frame sync time-based corrector for any NDI source. I'm running it locally. I'm running it in front of my main camera up there because its clock leaves a little something to be desired sometimes. Basically what it's doing is it's resyncing and figuring out what frames need to be scheduled when and sending it into vMix and making vMix very, very happy. vMix is very sensitive to cranky NDI sources too. That's a discussion for another day. So is OBS for that matter, but OBS is a little bit better behaved than vMix when it comes to working with NDI. That's been my experience. So I've got everything going into Netgear Switch. This is my personal switch from my office. I have studio now. Built the studio actually just a couple months ago. When did I build it? When was August? When was time? I don't know when time is anymore, but you get the idea. I've got a VLAN set up, so a segregated network for just NDI traffic, and I've got a network that's set up just for external facing traffic. So half the ports on here are NDI and half the ports are for external facing traffic. And I've got a lot of machines here that actually have 2 network cards inside of them. And in fact, this machine, this laptop, running inside this enclosure is a dual network card, a PCI Express network card in a Thunderbolt enclosure. So I can get a desktop. It's an old server. It's an old server card, but it still works great. It's instead of using the built-in chipset, the Realtek chipset, which is not great, leaves a lot to be desired. I'm using an old, I think right now that's running the Solar Flare. It's not present on my desk, so it must be the Solar Flare. This machine's been running PowerPoint, just using NDI screen capture. This bird dog converter has been powering my my return feed, or actually my confidence monitor, which is actually, this is an NDI feed right here. So, and this is being generated with a piece of software that I make called Multiview for NDI. Shameless plug. I swear this isn't planned. But I've built a basic multi-view for myself so that I could see my presentation notes, so I could see my, all the different cameras, what's up. And I've also got audio meters for my microphone, so I can be reasonably certain that the audio is still working, which is always fun. That's a good thing. Nobody ever turned off their audio so that video would come in better, right? So that's this little setup. And then behind the desk, I've got, I should have set up another preset actually so I could zoom that out and show you behind the desk. But over here, I've just got a Stream Deck. I'm using that to command the show. We're using Companion. These are the kinds of network cards I'm talking about. So this network card here, this one's, what is this? This is this one's the one that crashes. This is the Mellanox 3. That is really cranky on Windows. I don't actually use it all that much. There's an old server grade Intel X520 with a really noisy fan. Reason I like getting out network cards, external network cards or PCI Express network cards rather than using what's built in on the motherboard is that these guys typically have higher quality components inside of them so that they can handle burstier traffic a little bit better, and their drivers tend to be a bit better as well. This is a Broadcom card. It uses what's called SFPs instead of Ethernet, so you can do fiber optic with that. It's really cool. Fiber is really cool. Oh yeah, that's an Intel card that is really cranky because it is very particular about what SFP adapters I put in there. With some of these cards, you do have to get the proper firmware for them so that you can actually have full control over them. It's kind of annoying. And this card's fake. So little shopping pro tip for you. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to go and get an Intel X540 or an i350 or whatever, I'm going to get one from Amazon because Amazon sells everything. Don't do that. This thing uses non-genuine components and is, I think the technical term, a piece of crap. It doesn't actually, what some of these cards do, I'm not even joking, is they will advertise themselves and they'll work with the drivers for like a higher class card, like an X520 or 540, but they'll be running some ancient chipset where they've hacked the BIOS of the card, the firmware of the card, to be compatible with the driver, but under load it just falls apart. And they look fairly convincing, but they just use really low quality components. And half the time they come with little QR code stickers saying, hey, download the drivers from here. That's not a sign of quality. Mellanox does not advertise on their card where to download drivers. In fact, Mellanox doesn't make it easy to find their drivers. That's a different issue. No shade at any of these networking companies in particular. It's just like finding a good network card is a little bit of an art. But if you can go for an old server pull, like an old Intel X540, those 540s and 550s are pretty good. I like the 550s because they're passively cool. The 540s and 520s, I think they need fans, and the fans now are just getting old. That laptop right now, it's running an old Solar Flare 71 something. Solar Flare, I think, is now owned by AMD. Yeah, so it's like an AMD Solar Flare. It's really strange. But yeah, I'm still testing out all these different network cards to figure out how to make this all work properly. In general, though, I would stay away from Realtek. I've found nothing but issues with like a built-in Realtek network card. Just over doing more than a couple of streams, and the Realteks really start to fall apart. They're not. They're just the drivers are not the greatest. The chipsets themselves are not the greatest. The drivers don't do a great job of scheduling and handling packets in a timely fashion. So I would, if you can, move to some other kind of a network card rather than use a built-in Realtek. That's been my experience.
Possibly dumb question. How do you feel about using a USB NIC, or do you think you really need PCI Express connections for your network cards?
So this is tricky because it really depends. I went down this rabbit hole this week. It really depends on your system architecture. So this laptop that I'm running on, the Thunderbolt port actually has that has 4 PCIe lanes that go direct to the CPU. Whereas the USB architecture on that laptop is also sharing, it's attached to the chipset instead of direct to CPU, and it is sharing resources with the built-in network card, the built-in sound card, the Bluetooth module. I don't think NVMe is running on that, but if I could put SATA hard drives in there, and that would fight for resources too. So it depends. I'm still testing out different USB network cards. There is definitely, if you're doing Dante, they do have specific guidance around specific specific USB network cards. The really cheap Realtek-based ones, they operate in a mode that can be very, very slow and high latency on systems. Like It can actually slow the system down to the point where it's totally unusable for AV over IP. They have an article on their website saying here are the kinds of adapters to look for. If you do get a USB NIC, I have found that the Realtek 2.5 gigabit, they're okay. Just because they're faster, the drivers have to be a little bit better. They're okay, I think is what I could say. If you can go Thunderbolt and add that onto your laptop, or ideally right now ideally run a desktop machine that you can put a proper network card into.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Elias? We're kind of at time here. You see there we are. We're kind of running up on time. Not sure if you have anything else to wrap up or where
No,
we
that's
are.
I mean, I can do a little dance, but like I'm not really dancing. No, funny enough, I've reached the end of my content.
That's a good place to be.
Yeah, we're doing okay here. 10:30 Eastern. So yeah, have we got time for questions?
Yeah.
Cool. Fire away.
I think you got them already. You wowed everybody enough. And some of us aren't technical enough to probably ask the right questions anyway. I'm looking at people that I know. Yeah, awesome.
But so, if somebody's got a question and you know you're feeling like, hey, this is kind of an obvious question or it's not a good question, ask it. Let's go.
Yeah, I guess do you normally see like 2.5 gig is fast enough, or do you go to 5 or 10?
So there was a time where 2.5, especially on Windows 10, was really flaky. I mean, Windows 10 is about to go out of mainstream support, which kind of scares me because that means time is passing really fast. But now I would say if I had to build the system from scratch again, I'd actually go 10 gig because that's going to give you the processing involved. The hardware has got to be good enough to be able to handle 10 gigs. So you're going to get better line rates, which is how much you can sustain under load. I would go 10 gig as a real big safety margin. If you're doing a net new big setup, 10 gig is where you want to be. It's funny because when we originally built this out with gigabit, you know, when we were all fresh-faced and new, we were like, wow, we've got a gigabit. Like we can do so many sources. But then you start sending around like, oh, this 1080p 60 source needs to get to like 5 receivers. Oh, crap. We're like at, 700 megabits here. We got to be careful, right? Now, but there are ways to mitigate that too. So AV over IP, you can operate in 2 different modes. One's called multicast and one's called unicast. In unicast, the sender is responsible for making sure that that those packets get to all the different receivers. So if say you've got a stream, it's a 100 megabit stream, and if you've got 5 receivers, that machine has got to be capable of sending 500 megabits per second out. It is responsible for making sure the packets get to the network and get to the receivers. The switch is still involved, but all the connections are made direct to that sender. Multicast, on the other hand, what happens is the sender will send those packets to the switch, but it'll send it to a special broadcast address. And the switch is then responsible for figuring out who needs to get these packets. So you could have 1 receiver or you could have 100 receivers. But the bandwidth, the outbound bandwidth from that NDI device is the same. It's just 100 megabits per second. The switch is now responsible for making sure that those packets get to anybody that needs them, right? So the tricky part with multicast is that it was never designed for this kind of thing. So you need to have special software that's running to make sure you don't just take down an entire network, right? Like a network that is not specifically set up for multicast, if you put a multicast sender on it, your switch will send those packets out to everything that's plugged in. You get a couple of multicast sources going, you can take down a whole network. It's lots of fun. Makes the IT guys really shiny. This is not a plug for any particular network switch manufacturer, but this is why you get the higher grade switch so that you can that's got the AV profiles on it, so that you can do multicast scenarios if that's something that you're into. For NDI, we run multicast because for me, multicast realizes the dream of NDI in a hybrid setup. I can have a multi-view running. I can have my ISO recorders running, my isolated recorders running. I can have my stream that's going out to the internet. I can have my stream that's going out to the interpreters. I can bring the interpretation feedback. I can have my downstage monitors, my confidence monitors for the speakers. I can have a monitor at the back so that they can see the remote presenter. I can have monitors at the side for IMAG. And all of these systems, if I do it right, all of these different subsystems can all run independent of each other. If my multi-view goes down right now, we're still live to Zoom, and you'd have no idea. And the cool part is if I were to add ISO recorders to this setup, because we're using multicast, nothing else cares. Like assuming that that device behaves relatively well, nothing else is going to care on the network. So to me, running multicast kind of realizes the real dream of NDI and of AV-over-IP in general. Now, when it comes, we haven't even talked about cloud and broadcast in doing REMI stuff, right? But multicast doesn't really work in the cloud, but in the cloud, you've got like 10 gigabit networking is standard anyway, so, and it's all virtualized networking anyway, so multicast doesn't really need to be a thing. You can get away with unicast for reasons way outside the scope of this talk. There are some people way smarter than me figuring out networking in virtual environments. Wish I had the time to. Did that address the question? I feel like we got way off topic.
Any other questions from anybody? All good. Hopefully, cool. All right, Elias, you are off the hook.
Oh my goodness, is time flies when you're having fun.
I think this is going to be the wrap up. Let me switch accordingly, I guess, and say thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I hope this was useful to everybody.
Yeah, Elias, thank you so much. And yeah, definitely check them out on LinkedIn. A lot of posts. You're really good about that. I appreciate that. And we'll make this live, and I'll send you a link as well. All right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elias.
Have a wonderful night, everyone. Enjoy your snacks.
Thank you.